Liz, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Liz, you are all about art, Northeast Ohio, and making, well, artists' lives better, promoting their work, making people understand more, exploring the culture and promoting the culture of the arts in Northeast Ohio. Before we get into the arts, which is my main focus of our talk today, I want to know about you. Can you please, one, just give us a big little bit of a background of yourself and then how you transitioned into art?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised as a Lakewood girl, and I currently live in Bay Village. And begrudgingly, I always used to play them in sports, and I always really resented Bay Village. And the irony is, I live here now, but I really feel that my home is Cleveland, and I've worked in Cleveland from the early days as a bartender. Zygote Press, which is an organization I started, was out on East 72nd Street. And then we transferred over to East 30th Street. So I just have always felt that Cleveland is my home. And currently I'm working in Cleveland, and I started making art at the early age of 5 years old. I always knew that art was going to be what I wanted to do. And so I was fortunate because I just kind of moved into that direction, and found great purpose and happiness in this region. The only time I've not been here is when I went to graduate school, and I went to Detroit, which I feel is my other sister city with Cleveland. We have a lot of the same troubles and struggles as Detroit, and it's great to see Detroit doing much better than it had been when I was going to school. So I'm really thrilled that I still get to go back and forth pretty often.
I don't know where anybody's going to be listening to this or watching this, but if you're watching it on YouTube, you can see what's happening behind you. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, nobody can see. Can you explain what's going on back there?
So I love collecting art myself, and I have almost all exclusively local, regional friends and students. I taught at the Cleveland Institute of Art for some time, as well as Kent State University and Tri-C Metro, as well as LCC. I was an adjunct, and then I was on part-time staff. And so it's so wonderful to kind of have these beautiful pieces of art and ceramics and sculptures and all kinds of stuff that I live with, and it's all around me. I think of all of the people that made it, and it really brings great joy and great joy to my life.
So those are regional artists that you are displaying on your wall. They're all kinds of different artists then.
Yes. I a couple of years back, and I've obviously added things to my collection since then. But my son went around and photographed all of the pieces that are just framed and on my wall. And on a trip to Alaska, I put in where I got them, whose they were, how much I purchased them for, or if I traded. And I had 469 pieces. So there's no more wall space at my house.
Tell me about some of the look. Again, I want to get a little more visual here. Like, you have these pieces on your wall. You have these pieces from different artists all around town. Can you tell me a little bit about their ideas, these creations, some of the people that you got to know personally, and why you chose to hang those specific pieces on your wall? What is it about what they do? Because I think by explaining this, you're going to be able to tap into a little bit of the soul of Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk about two pieces. One of them is Reverend Albert Wagner, who is a self-taught. If you can see them up on top of the clock, I'll describe them. They're a little boy and a little girl in used frames, and they basically are walking down the street. And Reverend Albert was an artist who grew up in East Cleveland, and he had, I believe 17 children, and he was a sharecropper's son. He moved here. He ran a moving business for a long time. And he basically had an epiphany at 55 where he started to make art. And his house in East Cleveland was a museum to to the work that he was producing out of, detritus and junk and stuff that people would leave on his porch. And his whole house was filled, salon style, from the basement to the attic. And we were very fortunate to work with Reverend Albert and to create work with him when I was at Zygote. And he's passed away now, but he leaves a legacy of a lot of other young creatives in East Cleveland, Michelangelo Lovelace, and others that became his students. He was a huge mentor to sort of see somebody else making art and trying to tell stories through the art that they made. So I just feel I had a little boy and a little girl, and they got to go through his studio with my mom, and it was really an extraordinary experience. And so I really wanted to remember him with a little boy and a little girl. And I have since had a third child, so I'll have to pick something up if I can find some more of his work.
That's interesting that you mentioned his art, and you mentioned people would leave things around, and he would turn them into and repurpose them, and that's
Hmm.
basically turning junk into something that's valued by everybody. And also, you mentioned that he liked to mentor. That basically found a lot of rough items, a lot of roughness, and turned it into something that's valuable to everybody in terms of somebody's personality to actual physical items that you can see in day to day life. Do you think that is a kind of a juxtaposition to Northeast Ohio or the Cleveland area in general? Because Cleveland is, it's the Rust Belt. It's, kind of it's a city that has a lot of issues because of the economic situation, the flight out to the suburbs, the loss of jobs because of our steel industry. Do you see that as being almost poetic Cleveland?
Yeah, I know that the sort of Rust Belt and post-industrial sort of waste narrative is something that we find, I think, in the arts as something that's relevant, but also it is sort of cliche, and it minimizes, I think, a
Hmm.
lot of the really sort of renegade work that's going on. I do think that there's opportunities here for artists of all backgrounds, which wasn't maybe as I think that that was something that it didn't really happen maybe in the last 10 years, um, where it was very much the struggle of young people who maybe didn't go through the art school route, or they would go into different institutions, and particularly with BIPOC artists, they didn't necessarily see themselves reflected on the walls of museums and in galleries. And so the trajectory for many wasn't possible. And I think that those conversations are changing. And I think that the materials and the access points to what artists make from, and Reverend Albert is a perfect example where, although his house doesn't exist anymore, Alenka Benko is working on creating this sort of memorial museum with his daughter Bonita. And so sort of things are starting to come around and uplift his memory. And hopefully there'll be more people that can show in the space, and especially those that didn't go that sort of art school academic route, where they just wanted to tell their stories. They're storytellers. And another person I was going to talk about, who I collect and I love her work, is Martha Cliffel, who is lives in Lakewood, but she also has a farm out in upstate New York. And she was raised in a family of 7 girls, all raised Catholic. And she was a mother in Lakewood. And I grew up with her daughter, Kristen, who is also an artist, Kristen Cliffel. And her mother started to make art at 55. And she started to make it from going to thrift stores, mostly sort of Catholic thrift stores. And she used to sort of make her stories. And the work is really hilarious. They're assemblages, which is basically where you take objects and you put them together, and you're able to kind of tell a story by quoting things from the past, but sort of making it your own. And her studio and Kristen's studio is right on the edge of Cleveland and Lakewood in the Screw Factory. And there's a lot of it's an oasis for people who want to try to find really great art. And so it's a great place to check out.
I appreciate that you corrected me of the, I guess, stereotypical trope that I use for explaining Cleveland, Ohio, and other cities in the Rust Belt. What is Cleveland to you? What is Cleveland? What would you say if that trope was used and you want to explain? No, actually, Cleveland is like this, and this is how art is to the community of Cleveland.
I think that the first word that comes to mind is possibility.
Hmm.
I think that it is a place that I wouldn't have ever been able to open a place with my three other co-founders like Zygote Press anywhere else. One, there's space. There's amazing amenities like the lake and the metro parks and green space. I think you can get a lot of places in no time. And I think people are really remarkably friendly and really want to make you feel at home and welcome here. Um, I think that those are the types of things that allow us to sort of see the challenges and the gaps or the redundancies, and to be able to kind of work collectively to try to analyze what those things are and to create new possibilities to fill those spaces. And I think that that's sort of how I generally operate in sort of the creative community engagement work that I like to do.
You said that people are nice, or other places that people aren't nice.
Well, I mean, I think that I remember once I went to New York and I bumped into somebody, and I think we were in Greenwich Village. And by the time I turned around to apologize, they were already, 2 blocks down. So it's sort of like, you know, I think it is something that people we have a lot of we had a lot of artists that were in residency that came to Zygote from Dresden, and that was the one thing that they really were so surprised about, is how friendly people are here in Cleveland and how willing they are to help you find something, to showcase a good restaurant to go to, how to navigate you to a place that you might not that you're not familiar with. And so I
Mhm.
really do believe what they say. So we had 20 years of visitors from Germany, and they all hands down would say that about Cleveland.
I want to go back to something that you said a little bit ago about traditionally schooled artists and people who just want to tell their story. And I want to juxtapose that to the funding of the arts. Do you find, I have two questions that came out of that, of what you said. The first one is, do you find that one artist is more prepared or thrives better in the art community based off of their training, of course, traditional schooling versus trying to find their voice on their own? And the second one is how does funding of the arts and their art work? Do you see that more money is allocated to the traditional schooled or the self-taught? And how do you think that they kind of rationalize the interest in their art vis-a-vis their education?
I think historically, we have had a lot of terrible approaches to funding all artists, particularly BIPOC artists in this region and in this nation. I think when you look at the art sector and art institutions, predominantly when you look at boards, when you look at executive teams, when you look at staff and people who work there, they have been predominantly white. And they've been sort of, I think, reluctant to give up those positions of power. And so when we're in a sort of moment of consciousness of trying to kind of make sure that we have a space that people can come to, and that everybody feels that sense of belonging, and that their stories are being told. I think we're at that point where that's starting to sink in very, very deeply across sort of all of these different echelons that I was just talking about.
Mhm.
Thankfully, and I myself have been um, digging deep and learning and educating myself and conversing and talking with very deep, painful conversations about this, you know, the ability to support and value and to make sure that the vibrancy of our arts and culture ecosystem is across the board fair, equal, and that we all get to sort of share in the joy of the diversity of how people contribute and also how they benefit from that system. So in Cleveland, currently, we have a Cuyahoga County, I should say, we have a cigarette tax that is regressive. They're looking at what new funding could look like, and they're looking at how those conversations are going to, um, uh, the engagement points of how those conversations are going to play out. So we have some organizations like Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, we have Arts Cleveland, and we have a political action committee now that are aligning, and some convening is starting to happen with individual artists. That's called the Artist Bridge Coalition, and I'm really happy that some of these conversations that that are hearing the voices of individual artists are starting to happen, because without individual artists, musicians, dancers, you don't have the Cleveland Orchestra, you don't
Right.
have the Cleveland Museum of Art, and
Right.
so on. And Kevin, Mr. Soul Harp, I think, said that best in one of our last meetings, that these folks need to be at the table, and so I think that uh, finding how artists can be more helpful, how we can get outside of our studios and our ateliers and be able to participate in those, is really the excitement of that sort of civic engagement, which artists have not been a part of in the past, because they've been fiercely independent. They've been introspective. They've been, I think, a pretty isolated in their own space, their own silos of painting or, ballet or classical music or whatever that is. And so it's really exciting that we're starting to sort of, I think, venture in to a much more holistic way of thinking about the arts and civic engagement in this region.
I'm gonna have to read between the lines here, because my question was schooling versus non-traditional educated schooling, but then your answer alluded to biracial people of color. Were you implying, and I'm reading between the lines here, is that more traditionally schooled artists are white and more self-learners are biracial people of color?
Um, I wasn't inferring that, but there might be an argument for that in terms of all the rest of the systemic, um, uh, uh, you know, um, sort of wraparound of challenges that
Right.
BIPOC communities have in terms of education, housing, and so on. And so I believe, though, that there is a real conversation between people who have a studio practice versus people who have a practice like Reverend Albert, where it's just a part of his DNA to tell the stories of his life, as well as people who want to work in with the community. All of those are very different types of the products that come out are all very different. And I don't think that they've all had a level playing field throughout the course of this time. And so those are all sort of things that play within this conversation that I think that the Cuyahoga County artists are trying to, to to understand and to make sure that all of them are valuable.
I want to move off a little bit more of like the society aspect of art for a minute. And I just want to, well, I guess this is still society, but I want to go into the financial aspect of this. And i- there's the starving artist narrative. And I assume, and I'm not in the art community, I don't know if this is true or not, but I assume that a lot of the arts in general, and I know maybe not let me take that back. A lot of the arts in general, and this is my theory or my assumption, is paid for by either grants or taxes or what have you, or people or patronage of people who just want to donate to the arts. What do you say to people when they say that the arts is a waste of taxpayers' money?
Well, I think that let's just use this example right now. So we're all at home, even when we were sheltering in place. And so where did we go? We went to Netflix. I was really excited because the Cleveland International Film Festival was streaming all of their films. A lot of people have been reading, and a lot of people have been listening to music during this time to help us, I think, de stress, um, uh, curb our anxieties, make us sort of lose ourselves. Many of us were gardening, we were cooking, we were, making our own art in some respects with our kids.
Hmm.
And so I do believe that once you whittle it all down and you really evaluate the arts in your life, the sort of design of your house, the objects that you have in it, when you start really navigating that, I believe it creates the sort of bite in our lives that we don't necessarily always feel is needed. That it
Mm.
isn't one of the basic survival, food, shelter, healthcare that people feel is really necessary to support in their lives. So that's my sort of contrary point to that. Um, by allowing the sort of right side of your brain, especially in young kids, to understand the stories and empathy and how a sort of narrative and understanding of the sort of worldview without the arts. I don't know how how one can sort of understand those types of negotiations and strategies that can impact their lives. And so I do feel like it's really, really valuable. Now, artists aren't any more special than a plumber, and they're not any more special than a podcaster. But they do bring skill. They do bring a value to our society in terms of economic development, the way in which education engages learning. A lot of people loved their art class. They loved their gym class. These are two things that did they love their math class? Maybe not so much, but it's so great too that educators are seeing how art can be that sort of great convener to get them more interested in some of these different types of subjects. And I see that in my own kid's life, and even with people. We worked with the Thomas Jefferson Newcomers Academy, which is all refugee and newcomers here to Cleveland, K through 12, which is over in the Clark Fulton neighborhood. And what's so extraordinary is they don't understand English yet, but through an animation and a film class taught by the Apollo Outreach Initiative, they were able to take sort of shells and different objects, and they were able to do stop animation and tell a story through that they can work and transcribe. And for me, those types of moments with being able to communicate something in a way is really where I see the power of the arts happening.
I think that for me, at least, the places that I live, the places that I have lived, And there's been many places. I've lived in Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong, Taiwan. I've lived in, suburbia. I've lived in big cities in the United States, San Diego. You've been to New York City. I've been to New York City. We both live in Bay Village. We see that some of the most exciting places, I would say, in my opinion, on my journey, was the places where arts were prevalent, where arts were everywhere, where people were creating, where things were lively, where there was always a place where you could walk down the street and turn your head and go, wow, that's cool. I wonder how that was made, or who made that, or where'd that come from, or I didn't see that yesterday. Just, that energy and that vibrancy of, a living, breathing city or environment or culture. And when you go to places like a suburb, you don't see that as much. You see maybe the McMansions and the strip malls and the Walmarts, and everything is pretty much boring. So we understand and think innately that there is a value to art, yet we choose not to value it in the same way. What do you think that why do you think that is? Why do you think that people can appreciate art, appreciate the vibrancy, appreciate the creative and energy that is put into a city or a neighborhood, but yet when it comes down to paying for it, that we just say, nah, this is not, it's not worth it.
Well, I mean, I think that that's where uh, artists have to be able to kind of talk um, a different kind of language and be more integral in our civic, our a larger civic dialogue. And we just have not been. We don't have anybody who's at the table either at the city of Cleveland or at the county of Cuyahoga that is a cultural commissioner that can sort of see where the connectivity is happening with education, with sustainability, with economic development. So the millions and millions and millions of dollars that are coming into this region because people are going to the museum and then they're going out to eat afterwards and they're paying for parking and they're doing all of these types of things. That those types of captures where we're making sure that our councilmen and the people who are making decisions understand what it is that we do and the benefits of that to attracting more people to this region, getting more tax dollars downtown, getting more people to kind of experience our city in a dynamic way. What really was mind-bending to me moving to Bay Village is how few people go to Cleveland and
Hmm.
really understand the beautiful, amazing, vibrant neighborhoods like Collinwood, which is just brimming with amazing art galleries and places to do things. Waterloo Arts and Praxis and Brick and Photocentric and Deep Dive. Going to Slavic Village, to Rooms to Let, to see the rich history of a neighborhood that has really been impacted and is trying to re-engage and figure out what their next chapter is going to look like. And Gordon Square and some of the things that are happening in Midtown and Buckeye, and making sure that that kind of work isn't displacing people, isn't hurting communities that are living there, and to make sure that those conversations are including folks at the table. And currently we don't really have a lot of that stuff. So it is a much larger conversation and a big umbrella that hopefully is something that all of these different groups that I mentioned before, the individual artists and the advocacy groups for the arts and the granting agencies and then the advocates, the political action committees are all really working in tandem together for the benefit of everybody. So that hasn't always happened in the past. And so we need to understand how we can work better to make a better future.
So if I was going to summarize that, you would say that the people have to understand the impact, and the city council or the elected officials need to understand the value of art within their communities, reach out to the artists so that they can work together to make those communities more vibrant, to further foster development financially and culturally within their neighborhoods, correct?
Yes, yes. And it takes a lot of other people that, we're going to have a new mayoral election coming up. So
Hmm.
it takes even our elected officials to understand really what making art looks like. What do we do? And we're not so great at being able to articulate that. So demystifying that we have studios, we pay taxes, we're in your neighborhood, let's invite you over so we can really show you our day to day and all of the
Mm.
people whose lives we touch. And so those are the types of things that need to happen at the ground level. So the folks making the decisions and getting more artists to be in these sort of political positions is also, I think, really exciting. Having artists and residents at the city level,
Mm.
having artists look at challenges because we have this different right side of the brain, that we look at things more intuitively. We look at things in terms of empathy. We're able to tell a story in a different way, and it's not all linear, logical. And so some of these are things that are happening all over this nation. It's just not happening here.
You basically said that representation is important. How do we I guess this is gonna be a kind of a cynical question, and I don't want it to be, but it has to be. Representation is important. There's a lot of different groups that need representation. How do you find the how do you get all of those groups to be represented without it being bloated in a democracy or in a government? How do you represent the artists? How do you represent the other people that need representation without having that just get too big and too complex?
Well, as you and I both know, in terms of community organizing, it's really looking at these early conversations. It's convening people, listening to them, having them, having various people who are bringing what their challenges are to the table and giving them agency. Talking to the people, what's currently there, what are the issues with what's currently there, how is it funded, and really trying to understand both sides of the story so you can sort of see where the shifts, the changes, the alterations can happen. And it's a time consuming, exhausting, but I think exciting possibility, because that um, relationships are being built, and a new future and changes can actually be possible.
Last question. Before I ask this last question, I want to say thank you very much for spending some time and talking about arts in Northeast Ohio, around the Cleveland area. And you said that people need to get to know the day to day of artists and know how they are entrenched and act and conduct business and function within their neighborhoods and communities. How can somebody do that? And how could you be reached? And would you be one of the conduits to get people to understand that day to day?
Absolutely. So I can be reached at lizmaugansart.com, which is my website if anybody wants to see my own work, because I'm an artist as well. And you can reach me at lizmaugans at gmail.com. Super simple. And I'm on Facebook and all, Instagram. Um, uh, I think that there's a really great resource for a lot of people who just want to look at all different kinds of musicians, artists, writers, and you can go to the Cleveland Artist Registry, which has different, like 500, 600 plus multidisciplinary artists, and it's a registry, and you can go and you can hire them, or you can go and set up a studio visit. There's a lot of great places. I mentioned the Screw Factory, There's 78th Street Studios, that is like a hive that has tons and tons of studios and record stores and different things that are in that space. Um, all of the neighborhoods, from Slavic Village to Collinwood to Gordon Square, to Buckeye, they all have lots of different types of things that are going on. Land Studios, if you want to find out more about public art, what's going on in the region, they're a great resource for this. I mentioned a couple of the agencies, Arts Cleveland and Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. They have lots of pages talking about what's going on in the city that people can participate. Many of them, of course, are safe and virtual right now. If you want to find me and come to the gallery, there's a couple of things at Yards Projects, which is at Worthington Yards, and I'd love to see you and give you a tour of the building. And the website for that is Yards Project. There's no S at the end.com. And I hope that I've covered. We're in Bay Village, and I just wanted to put a plug out for my good friend Nancy Heaton and her team over there, who's doing really great work at Bay Arts, and they've been quite the home for us, and that's where my studio is currently, that they're letting me use a space up there. And I'll be having a show that's coming back here that's called Leftover Casserole. So it's all of the things that I've been using from my house and sort of putting inside, not unlike Reverend Albert and not unlike Martha Cliffel, to put inside of this artwork. So I hope that you guys can come and see it.
Well, I'm looking forward to coming to see it. And Liz Maugans, co-founder of Zygo Press, curator of the Dalad collection, director of the Yard Project. I don't know. There's so many. I don't know how you even had time to come on the show today, but I appreciate the time and I appreciate you having this conversation.
Matt, can I put one more plug in for?
100%.
Okay, there's an extraordinary a journal as well, and they also are online, and it's called the Collective Arts Network. It's something that we started after the recession at Zygote when I was the executive director. And it really does, for the visual arts, it really does encompass a lot of the energies that are going on. The new issue just came out, and you can get it at Heinen stores. You can get it at over 200 different outlets, or
nice.
You can just go to the online, go online to canjournal.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Liz, for coming on.